Hi everybody, this is a lesson on secondary dominance for my music theory class, Vertical 2, number 4, and anybody else at NCSSM that wants a quick introduction to secondary dominance. What I always like to say is if you look at a piece of music that has no accidentals in it at all, then that piece of music is probably diatonic. In other words, all of the chords are going to fit into the diatonic chords that we've learned. The 1 is major, the 2 is minor, the 3 is minor, 4 is major, 5 is major, 6 is minor, 7 is diminished, and then we're back to 1. But if you look at a piece of music and there's an accidental in the music, then there's a good possibility that you might be dealing with a secondary dominant. So again, I would just remind you, in the key of F major, this piece has 1 flat, might be in F major, or D minor. In the key of F major, we've got a major 1, minor 2, minor 3, major 4, major 5, minor 6, diminished 7, and major 1. Okay, so we take a look at this piece of music and we'll start to analyze it. Well, first of all, if you look at the first triad, you've got F and an A, so that's probably a 1 chord in the key of F major. And here at the end, you've got F, A, F, again, probably a 1 chord. So I'm thinking we're certainly in F major. And if you take the time to analyze the chords that do not have accidentals, they're pretty simple. You've got a 4 chord here on the 3rd pulse of the 1st measure. You've got a 5 chord here on the 3rd pulse of the 2nd measure, a 2 chord, a 5 in an inversion, and then back to a 1. But the real problem lies with this accidental, because if you take a look at it, you've got a G and a B natural, so it starts to look like it might be a major 2 chord, and that honestly can't really happen. Then the other little thing that I notice here is that you've got an F natural here, so it sort of makes it look like a major 2-7 chord. Well, again, that doesn't really fly. It's not something that we're going to ever see, particularly because the 2 chord has to be minor. So what ends up happening is this chord is a secondary dominant chord. It's actually the 5 of the next chord, the 5 chord. Now, what am I talking about? The 5 of the 5. Well, with secondary dominants, we sort of think of them as little key changes, little mini key changes. And really, if we take a look at this one, it's a 5-7 of 5. This word dominant really is part of this. It's a dominant chord is a 5 chord that pulls back to some kind of tonic. So this is like a little temporary key change to the key of the 5, and this is the 5 of 5. So what am I talking about really? Well, if the triad doesn't fit into the diatonic triads of the key, it might be a secondary dominant. If you see accidentals in the piece, it might be a secondary dominant. Now, you guys know that when we were working with minor keys, we saw accidentals when the minor 5 of a minor key was changed to a major 5. So that's another time that we see accidentals. So it's not always a secondary dominant when we have an accidental. But if we're in a major key and we start seeing accidentals, there's a good chance that that's what's happening. That's what the composer is doing. So if you see a major 2 chord or a 2 chord in the major mode, then you start thinking, well, I wonder if it's a 5 of 5. And I can explain this just a little further if we write out our diatonic chords all the way past the 8th chord, the 1, and we go to the, okay, minor 2, minor 3, and we have that major 2 here. Well, if we sort of temporarily think of this as the 1 chord and we count forward 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we can see that temporarily this 2, when it's in the major mode, could be the 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 of 5 temporarily. Now we'll know it's a secondary dominant because it doesn't stay in that key. It just gets there, pretty quickly. Now, are there other secondary dominants? Absolutely. So we can start thinking, okay, there's other places that we might see this. For instance, if you see a 6 chord in the major mode, then you might think, well, I wonder if it's a 5 of 2. And we'll just show you here. Here's your minor 6. If it's a major chord triad, then think, okay, I wonder if it's a 5 of 2. And typically, or really as a rule of thumb, the next chord after the secondary dominant is the chord that it's the dominant of. So typically, if we would see a 5 of 2, the very next chord would be a 2 chord. Typically, if we see a 5 of 5, the very next chord that we see is the 5 chord. So let's go back here. Okay, thirdly, if you see a 3 chord that's in the major mode, think of that as a 5 of 6 and see if it works. So a 3 would be here, okay, major 3. Wonder if it's a 5 of 6. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, a secondary dominant. So in most cases, the secondary dominant should lead to the triad it is the dominant of. In other words, a 5 of 5 is typically followed by a 5. A 5 of 2 is typically followed by a 2. So in this case, when we have that triad that we think, okay, that's a major 2, well, if we get into that thought that this is a 5 of 5, it leads to the 5. It is a 5 of 5 leading to the 5. And the thing that really tips us off is it's actually a 5/7 of 5. And that really gets us where we want to go. I hope that this makes sense. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to stop and see me.